Welcome to another episode of the Driver's Alert podcast, where we interview some of the most influential people in driving safety. Our guest today is Melissa Wandall. She is a nationally recognized traffic safety advocate and the president of the National Coalition for Safer Roads. On October 24th, 2003, her husband Mark was killed when the car he was a passenger in was struck by another vehicle that had run a red light. At the time, Melissa was 9 months pregnant with her first child. Determined not to let Mark's passing happen without purpose, Melissa began devoting her time to push for the use of red light cameras at intersections. On May 13, 2010, Melissa's years of advocacy paid off as the Florida State Legislature passed the Mark Wandall Traffic Safety Act. This act established uniform standards for the use of red light cameras across the state. Melissa is also the founder and president of the Mark Wandall Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to facilitating support for children in grief. Melissa, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
I can't imagine, all the things that you've been through, but it's inspiring, I think, really, the commitment that you've had to just overall improving road safety in the state of Florida. So I really want to commend you for that.
Thank you very much. I think you have to take the love that you were given and not the loss and push through and try to do some really great things out there to make sure it doesn't happen to other people.
Rather than have you go through the entire story again and recount it, you had participated in producing a video, and so we're going to take a look at that video clip, and then we kind of fill in the gaps from there. So let's go ahead and watch that video on the story.
On the night of October 24th of 2003, my husband and my brother had gone out for a quick bite to eat. My husband was a passenger and my brother was the driver, and they were on their way home. My brother was stopped at a red light. When the arrow turned green, he proceeded through the intersection, and that's when a motorist ran the light. I got a phone call that urged me to come to our intersection, which is only 1.25 miles from our home. And I was 9 months pregnant, and I ran, and I just saw lights and sirens, and the whole world stopped for me at that moment. He had died on impact, so he had lost his life right there. And it's a brutal scene that nobody ever wants to see. It doesn't ever go away. I promised my husband that night, even though he had already passed, that I would take care of our unborn child and that I would make sure that she was a happy baby and that she would be born into love and that she would be born into goodness and she would not be marked by tragedy.
She'd leave for the park for the dog time to play.
And because of that promise, because of the love that I've shared with my husband, and because of the love that I have for my daughter, I've been able to go on to campaign for red light cameras at the intersections in the state of Florida. I studied the cameras and how they worked and why they worked, and looked at other states and really got into detail as how they can curb the behaviors of red light running. And I realized that that was going to be a deterrent. That was a way to make sure that somebody else wouldn't have to die so tragically at an intersection.
Melissa, whatever happened to the driver of the vehicle that caused the collision?
She got a $500 fine in community service, and she had 10 previous points on her license. Her last offense was for running a red light and being ticketed for it. So unfortunately, I only hope that, that she has learned her lesson. When you run a red light and kill somebody in the state of Florida, it's a fine. But as long as she, learns her lesson, it's unfortunate that, the year prior she took a ticket, and this time she not only took a ticket, but she took a life. So it's a really hard lesson to learn. Being a victim is horrible. Being a violator, you have to live with it for the rest of your life.
Was it ever determined why she ran the light? Was she distracted, or did she just try to beat the light?
She just said she was arguing with her child in the back seat of the vehicle. So it's unfortunate. There was just never really any reason that she came up with other than that she was arguing with her child in the back of the car.
And was she hurt at all? Anybody in her vehicle hurt? You said she had a child with her?
Yeah, no, thank God. She had her child in a safety seat. That's the one thing I'm grateful for every day is that she had her child in a safety seat. There were 3 cars involved in that crash. There were actually a total of 8 people. 7 people went to the hospital, and my husband, of course, went to the morgue. My brother was actually the driver in the vehicle that my husband was in. So he was seriously injured and lives with emotional difficulties to this day.
I get one other question related to that too. Did you ever have a chance to speak to the driver that caused the accident, or do you know if she was remorseful at all? I mean, any communication at all after the fact?
I would hope to God that she is. I saw her in court. We went to court, and it was in court where there were people that were fines for too much load in their vehicles. And I just looked at her, and I was holding Madison, who was about 3 months old at the time. And I said, I just hope that you realize that this could have been your own child, and I hope that you'll drive safe from here on out. But I don't know. I haven't been in touch with her. And I kind of left her there, that day. And I hope to God that she has peace and that she has not made any more horrible driving decisions.
I guess the question I'm always interested in is, you go through this tragedy, and it's obviously, all the things that you go through, and there are different stages of grief and how you come to terms with it. At what point did you decide there was going to be more to it than this, and that, you weren't going to let that define you, and you wanted to do something to champion the cause of road safety? Was there a defining moment, or did it gradually happen?
No, it was immediately. It was, it's crazy because when I look back now and I talk to other, people in grief, and I always say, take your time and grieve. Because once you decide to take what you have immediately in your lap and try to do something with it, it's a lifetime. And it's a lot of things that come at you after that. It was momentarily. I just remember not at that point, at that intersection, we had no idea what had happened that night. But as we got into it and I started to see that it was a preventable act, I knew immediately that was the way I was going to kind of grieve for my husband in a positive way, is to find a way to prevent that from happening to anybody else. Because to have a child, he was so excited about being a dad and just being 2 weeks from being a dad. I wanted to show my daughter that I was not a broken mommy, and that we would take what we had and do something great for not only ourselves, but other people as well. Prevention is what it's all about when you have something like that sitting in your lap.
So on a positive note, let's take a look at the video clip here. This one commemorates the moment that the Mark Wandall Traffic Safety Act, I believe, was passed in 2010. So let's go ahead and view that clip.
May 2010. Florida's then Governor Charlie Crist makes it official, signing the Mark Wandall Traffic Safety Act into law. It caps a 5-year effort led by Mark's widow, Melissa.
This has always been about making sure that Mark's memory lives on, that we make sure that we make a difference for what happened that night, just a quarter of a mile from our home.
Mark Wandall was killed by a red light runner just 2 weeks before Melissa gave birth to their daughter, Madison.
I knew that red light running was preventable. I knew that it was a tragic crash, and I didn't want it to happen to anyone else.
Under the Wandall Safety Act, cities are allowed to install traffic cameras to catch drivers who run red lights. It also calls for a portion of the fines to go to a specific and meaningful purpose. $10 of every fine supports local trauma centers around the state, while another $3 goes here, to a world-class research center at the University of Miami, called the Miami Project to Cure Paralysis.
Most people don't understand. They think when somebody runs a red light, there's either near misses or everybody's okay. And then you hear about the ones, like my husband, Mark, who were killed. But then a lot of times, you really hear about the people that are injured. The Miami Project is going to be able to help so many of those people. Now,
Melissa, maybe you can help clarify. Prior to the passing of the Mark Wandall Traffic Safety Act, what was the status of red light cameras in the state of Florida? Was it actually illegal to use them? Is that how I perceive it to be? Is that accurate?
That is accurate. Yes, you have to be able to, as for cities can individually decide, the city commission can individually decide to put up cameras in their city, but the county can't. So we wanted to make it a statewide effort where it was available to every city and county that would want to put them in their city or county.
Okay. And so, I mean, obviously, all of the personal time that you've spent on this subject, just in general, you've studied red light cameras, you've spent lots of time advocating for their usage. Just in general, what have you learned about it?
Well, I've learned so many great things. First of all, you think, I didn't, definitely when my husband passed away, there was no way I would ever think about going up to Tallahassee and passing a bill. You learn that you're so much stronger than you ever thought that you were. But I've learned that there's people that are so vehemently against things, like safety things that you think would be a no-brainer because you want to save people's lives, that people are against it. And you learn to you have compassion for other people's misunderstanding. I've learned that it doesn't take overnight to do things. Things that you work slowly to pass is the way to do it, because you're educating people along the way. Even the people that were against the red light safety cameras, you're still educating them. You're still letting them know that there is a problem, that there is an epidemic out there, because so many people would say, oh, I didn't know that people die from red light running. You have to really show them. You have to make people feel your heart and understand that when you're advocating for something, you have to not only have compassion, but you have to have critical knowledge. And I knew that going in. I knew that I would have to know exactly what I was selling and why I was selling it.
And it sounds like, in general, some of the research that I've done on red light cameras, it over time they do decrease the offenses, and then as the revenue from those citations begins to decline, then the cost of having those cameras in place then exceeds the revenue. And so it seems like in this particular case, I noticed you were on a local station talking with the councilman from St. Petersburg who voted against red light cameras. And it sounded like St. Petersburg recently, maybe a few years ago, took them down. And he was trying to justify, because this phenomenon that takes place, because they're actually working, they're effective, and now the cost is exceeding the revenue, so therefore there's our justification for taking them down. Forget safety, right?
Yeah, and that's so silly right there. That's just it. Is that common sense? They're working. He admits they're working, but the underlying issue is that he just doesn't like red light safety cameras or any automated enforcement. And that's such a shame, because when you take these cameras down at most intersections, number one, you can put them up at another intersection if it's really working very well at the intersection. But number two, once they go down, I mean, even the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety will tell you when a camera goes dark, they triple tragedy at these intersections.
And my understanding too is the fight is really ongoing. There's a group or a select few that are constantly trying to repeal the Mark Wandall Traffic Safety Act. And so this fight is one that you still live with today. Is that correct?
Absolutely. When I made the decision to pass this bill and to work on passing this bill, it is a part of who I am. I didn't do it just to have my husband's name on a bill. I didn't do it just to do it and then let it go. I mean, I have critical knowledge about it. I know they work. I stay on top of it. If these cameras did not work and they were not saving lives, then I would have my husband's name stripped off this bill. And unfortunately, there are so many people that can't see. They're so driven by their arrogance and by the fact that they think that a red light safety camera is an infringement upon their their privacy. But what about my husband? He didn't deserve for somebody to come out of nowhere and just take his life. So I think it's, for me, I will always stay in touch. I will always be a part of the red light safety cameras here in Florida and around the country because they save lives. And at the end of the day, if it's going to save some other little girl from having to, that will prevent her dad or her mom from being taken at an intersection, then I'm going to continue to do that.
And we have an example too. There's an excerpt of a clip from, I believe it was last year when you were speaking in front of the Florida Senate that kind of encapsulates just what this fight is like, and it's still fresh today. So let's go ahead and take a look at that short clip.
12 years I have walked these halls. 12 years I've lived with a gaping hole in my heart. 12 years I have been both a mom and a dad to my daughter. 12 years I have championed for safer roads in the hopes of preventing the emptiness in somebody else's life. And yes, one life does matter. Absolutely 5 lives matter, but one life does matter. Because had somebody done this before me, you know what? Maybe my husband would still be here today. Maybe not, but maybe he would have.
Do you remember what precipitated this appearance? Was there something that was ongoing that caused you to make another presentation before the Senate?
Yes, because the Senate has actually really stood behind the red light safety cameras. They've really held this bill. It has been the Senate that has held this bill all along. And it was going through a committee, and I just really felt I wanted it to end there in the Senate. It was starting there in that committee because some senators wanted, the bill to be repealed. And so I just felt so driven and such a desire to get people to understand that this is a safety tool in conjunction with education, awareness, advocacy, law enforcement. Automated enforcement will save lives. And I just really felt that I needed to have that discussion to make sure they understood that we're talking about human lives here.
And is it a small group of individuals? Is it one group? Who is typically behind this opposition movement? And what is usually their argument against red light cameras?
It's the same group. It's just a small. It's like 6 or 7 men that just continually. I don't know what their name is, but they just consistently. It's what they do for a living. They do not like automated enforcement around the country. So Florida is not the only place where they go. I had a man when the bill passed, I had a gentleman from Texas that belongs to this group, but he lives in Texas. And he told me that God would punish me for what I've done and that he's just the messenger. So that's the hatred, which I really don't have time for. I really don't. The worst thing happened on October 24th of 2003. My husband was killed, and it was a negligent act. It was preventable. So I'll continue to work on safety because I know it's just that important. And unfortunately, I just can't get caught up in their arrogance.
Now, as I mentioned in the intro, among many other things that you do, you're also the president of the National Coalition for Safer Roads. What does that coalition do?
Well, this coalition, we take in survivor advocates to really advocate for safer roads, as well as red light safety cameras, speed cameras, and school bus arm around the country.
And another project it looks like you have, I came across this one just this morning. So you have this website, drivingdownheartache.org. Could you please explain a little bit about what that does?
I will, absolutely. So I am a campaign ambassador for Alert Today, Alive Tomorrow, which is a Florida Department of Transportation bicyclist and pedestrian coalition. And we did a public service announcement on the Roadside Markers in the state of Florida. And I wanted a place to house that public service announcement. So I wanted to be able to, in the state of Florida, we have roadside markers when somebody is killed due to roadway tragedy. Most of the time, a roadside marker is put up. So I want people to understand what those roadside markers are, to be able to, say a prayer for those people, whether they were the victim or the violator, and also to be able to have there's somebody's heart. There's tons of hearts that reside on the side of the road in the state of Florida. And so what I do is ask families to share who their loved one was, whose life was lost on our Florida roadways. And so it's a really good place for them not to be angry or worry about what had happened, but just talk about who it is that they miss the most.
And my understanding too is that there's actually more than 5,000 roadside markers just in the state of Florida.
Yes, there's more. Yes, there's over 5,500 roadside markers in the state of Florida, and those in probably more than half of the people don't even have roadside markers that have been killed in the state of Florida.
Now, I also mentioned briefly in my introduction that in 2004 you founded the Mark Wandall Foundation. You lost a sister to cancer when you were younger. Is this correct?
That is correct. Yep. Today would have been her September 17th would have been her 53rd birthday. She was my older sister, and she died of cancer when she was 14, and I was 12, and my brother was 7. And when she died, my parents were amazing, but we still didn't have. We kind of felt lost. My brother and I. We were isolated, and I did not. And then once my husband passed away and my daughter was born 2 weeks later, I wanted a place for her to grow up with other kids who have had loss, to bring them together, to connect them, so that they don't have to go through this life alone. And it is such a pleasure and such a privilege to be able to serve these families, because when you serve these children and teens, you serve the caregivers as well.
You're involved in so many different things. So in addition to giving presentations on traffic safety, red light cameras, for instance, you also deal with speed cameras, school bus cameras, and we talked about just the issue of advocacy in general, and how to effectively approach it. What type of venues do you generally speak at, and what audiences are you presenting to?
It just depends on who calls. Like I just got asked to speak in Naples at a MAD event in November, and then I also got asked to speak at Oregon Department of Transportation. Their big safety meeting is coming up in October, and I'm speaking at that. And so a lot of times it's not only sharing my story, but it's giving best advice on advocacy. I have melissawandalladvocate.com is where a lot of people will call in, or not call, but they'll ask me some questions on advocacy. So I do a lot of that, kind of just almost answer the phone almost every day on somebody saying, how do I advocate for this or that? So it's not just advocating for safer roads, it's somebody advocating for children in crisis. I kind of go wherever God leads me. It's kind of every day is different.
Okay, and we'll share some of the other contact info here just shortly as well. As we're wrapping up, any additional comments, anything else that's coming up that you'd like to share with our audience, things that you're doing?
We are actually shooting through the Alert Today Alive tomorrow. We're shooting a public service announcement. Bicyclists and pedestrians a lot of times are getting in they're on a bike or they're walking after they've been drinking. They don't get in a vehicle, but they get on their bikes and they walk. And we are finding that a lot of them, unfortunately, are being killed. And so we're shooting a couple of public service announcements this week to showcase, what can happen. It's called One Foolish Act. So what can happen when you decide not to bike safely? When not to bike. When not to walk, when you've been drinking, or when you've been impaired. So it's going to be amazing, and I can't wait for that to get done and be able to share that too, because some people are learning not to get in their vehicles, but we certainly don't want them walking and biking either.
Now, you mentioned melissawandalladvocate.com. Are there some other ways that people can get in touch with you?
Yes, you can get in touch with me, Melissa at melissawandall.com. And that's Melissa at melissawandall, WANDALL.com. You can reach out to me via email. And, please, if you have any questions, or I just want to thank everybody and, highway safety. Unfortunately, because 200 people aren't killed, all in one setting. People don't think that it's a a cry for a call to action, but it really is. We lose people daily on our roadways. We just lost 2 young men in our community on Saturday night, excuse me, and their parents and brothers and sisters that are grieving heavily. We want people to be safe, and we all work together. And that's why I'm so appreciative of you, Rich, your work, and being able to do so many amazing podcasts and work with people to really showcase that safety is important. It's vital on our roadways.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, Melissa, thanks so much for joining us. I hope we can have you back sometime to talk about. I mean, you're doing so many things. I'm sure there's plenty of stuff to talk about. But thank you so much. You're spending so much time devoting to these great causes. And so I really do appreciate it.
It's my privilege. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, that was Melissa Wandall. She's the president of the National Coalition for Safer Roads and a nationally recognized advocate for the use of red light camera technology. Please follow the Driver's Alert website blog page as well as our YouTube channel to stay up to date on the latest podcast episodes featuring the most influential people in driving safety. Until next time.